We want to talk about today's world religions. This is a list of what are considered world religions today. The definition roughly is a world religion is one that affects a significant number of people and is not limited by geographical boundaries or national boundaries. It's not limited just to one country. Shinto is actually the one religion that is probably most limited to one country in terms of it being the folk religion of Japan. But Shinto exists in Japanese communities in other parts of the world as well, but we'll talk about that. This is a list in order of founding, Hinduism being the oldest religion world religion in the world, founded somewhere between 4000 and 2500 BC, the early Vedic period, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Judaism, 2000 BC, Buddhism, 560, I'm looking at the number, 560 to 490 BC, and then Chinese traditional religions, I'm going to speak to just briefly today because the religions of Japan, with the exception of Shinto, came over from China to Korea to Japan. And so there are a couple of religions I want to talk about that were big influences. And then Shinto, around 500 BC. In terms of talking about world religions, it's helpful to get the clicker to work. Oh, there we go. The families of religions, or large groupings of religions, help us sort of understand the various religions in the world. The one that most of us probably come from as a tradition, not all, but most, would be the Abrahamic religions. Those are the three great monotheisms in the world. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in that order in terms of the founding. They're called the Abrahamic religions because all three trace their lineage back to one man, and that was Abraham about 2000 BC, who was the father of the Hebrew people and therefore of the Jewish faith. The second large group are the Dharmic religions. The word Dharma in Sanskrit means teaching. These are religions that came out of India, which is the primary location for development of world religions, particularly Hinduism, the oldest religion, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. I'm not going to talk about Jainism and Sikhism at all. I always say if you want to find out about those, you can buy me a cup of coffee up at the yacht club and we'll discuss it, okay? But Buddhism we are going to talk about. The Buddhism is an interesting one in that it is a Dharmic religion. It began in India, and I'm going to talk about that, but the Buddhism that exists in East Asia today, that is in China, in Korea, and in Japan, is fundamentally different than the original Buddhism that came out of India. And in fact, Buddhism, there's very little Buddhism in India now. It's almost entirely either Hinduism or Islam. And of course, that split was what caused the division between India and Pakistan back a few decades ago. The third major group are the Taoic religions. It looks like Taoic, but it's pronounced Taoic religions. These are the religions of the Far East, especially China and Japan. They include Taoism, Confucianism, and Shinto, along with versions of Buddhism. And I'll explain that a little bit when we get into it. Those are the three primary groups that are considered today. We sometimes add a fourth group, which are the religions of Persia, or Iran, as we call it today, that predated Islam. These are now very small. There are very small populations, but Zoroastrianism, Mandeism, and the Kurdish Yazdanism faiths, you may have heard in the news about the Yazidis that were being persecuted terribly by ISIL or ISIS, the Alevis, and others. So there are three or perhaps four different groups of family religions, families of religions. One of the phenomena, I don't know if you noticed a minute ago, but for some reason, and no one knows why, a number of the world religions that exist still today were founded within 100 years of each other. Buddhism, somewhere around 560 to 490 BC. Chinese traditional religions, which include Taoism and Confucianism, right at the same time. Shinto, as we know it today, in Japan, and Jainism in India, all right around 500 BC. Again, no one knows exactly why that is. Very different countries, very different activities going on, but this is important enough that there's actually a name for it. It's called the Axial Age, when there was a huge burst of religious fervor globally, about 500 BC, and we have a number of religions started. Now, in terms of Japan, the vast majority of Japanese will practice Shintoism. But if you ask, and whenever they have done surveys, very few Japanese will say they belong to an organized religion, even Shinto. And the reason for that is because to the Japanese, Shinto is not a religion in the sense that it's something you join and that you attend regular services and that sort of thing. Shinto is perceived by the Japanese as being part of their history and part of their culture. To be Japanese for many of them is to be Shinto. And so they won't check the box that says I'm a member of Shintoism, but 80%, it's estimated, 80% of Japanese citizens or households have a kamidana, a shrine, a Shinto shrine in their homes. Kamidana literally means God shelf. But there's also a huge presence of Buddhism. 60% of the households in Japan are believed to have a Buddhist shrine in their home. So 80% of them have a Shinto shrine, 60% of them have a Buddhist shrine in their home. How does that work? Well, there's an unusual mixing. Rather than say, I belong to just one religion, and I've sort of had fun with this because we've been around Japan for a while now, my wife and I, this is several cruises. I will ask one of our guides as we're going around looking at Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples. And by the way, code. If the word shrine is used, it's Shinto. If the word temple is used, it's Buddhist. Okay, that's the easy way to tell the difference. Because they often don't say a Buddhist temple, they'll just say a temple. You'll know it's Buddhist then. Shrine is Shinto. Well, I will ask my guides, well, are you Shinto? The Japanese guys. And they will go, well, yes, I go to the shrine and everything else, but also, Buddhist. And I will say, so, Shinbutsu Shugo. And they go, yes, you understand. Shinbutsu Shugo is the Japanese word which represents a merging or a syncretizing of Shinto and Buddhism. So that it is not only possible, but very, very common for people to practice both Shinto religion, the ancient folk religion of Japan, and also Buddhism, which came to Japan in the 6th century AD. 552 is the usual date that they think of. So it's sometimes said lightheartedly, but it's pretty accurate, and various Japanese have confirmed that for us recently as we've talked to them, that most Japanese live as Shinto. They get married and celebrate Christmas as Christians, almost. I mean, they don't really practice the Christian faith, but the Japanese love the big white wedding gowns. And so getting married in a Christian church is very common. And then they get married as a Buddhist. In fact, where's Mizu? Is he in here?
Taking the festival.
Okay, there's a Japanese gentleman on board that we talked to, that we ate with the first night. And I asked him, so are you Shinto? And he said, no, I'm a funeral Buddhist. That's a common expression because at one point in Japan, Buddhism actually had the monopoly on burials. Shinto has a concept of the afterlife, but it is not very cheery. The afterlife in Shinto for most people will be to dwell in the land called Shomi, which is a land of shadows and darkness, separated from the rest of the living world. It's very much like the Greek concept of Hades, the place of shades. Whereas Buddhism, depending on what kind of Buddhism you practice, can involve being delivered to paradise. And so even if someone practices Shinto in Japan for their whole life, they will be buried as a Buddhist. And so that's what they mean by a funeral Buddhist. And I've heard that expression before, but Mitsu on board identified himself that way, so I can appreciate that. So this syncretism between Shinto and Buddhism is fundamental to understanding religion in Japan. I want to talk for a few minutes about Shinto, and then I'm going to get into Buddhism, but along the way I want to talk a little bit about Taoism and also about Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism, because they have had a huge effect on the practice of religions in Japan. Shinto, or to use the formal Japanese name, Kami no Michi, is literally the way of the gods. The word Kami, K-A-M-I, means a spirit, a deity, a spiritual essence. and it can be a person. For instance, the emperor is considered to be a kami. That's why they will talk about the emperor being a god. It is not God the way monotheists believe in God. It's probably closer to the idea of a great saint in like the Catholic Church. Because the idea in Shinto is that the kamis are great spirits. They can be associated with a person who's lived in the past, or it can be a beautiful waterfall. You'll have the opportunity when we get to Shingu to go up and see the tallest waterfall in Japan, Naichi, and that waterfall is believed to be representing a great kami, a great spirit. Sometimes extraordinary rock formations can be considered kami. So kami no michi, Shinto, is the way of the gods. It is, and some sociologists would argue with this description, but it's the simplest one. It's an animistic folk religion in Japan. Animistic means, animism is even more ancient, but it's not organized as a religion. It's more ancient than Hinduism. The idea that all things, particularly all living things, have a spirit. Native American religions, you've heard, the spirit of the mountain, the spirit of the plain, the spirit of the river, the spirit of the buffalo, the spirit of the wolf. So this idea that there are spirits in all things, particularly living things, but they can be things in nature as well. In fact, in Shinto, they believe that the evidence of a kami is when you feel a sense of awe, when you feel a sense of wonderment in the presence of something. That is an indication that there are kami present. The idea is that the kami live in the world but are not visible to us. It's almost like they are around us, but they're in another dimension. And we can't have direct contact with them. But the more a person is practicing Shinto, the more one is in connection with the kami, then the more one will be able to experience them. There's an expression called Karagara no Michi, which means the way of the kami. The more one is invested in the ritual practices of Shinto and in recognition, acknowledgement of the kami, and your ancestors have kami as well. That's why in Japan they talk about ancestor worship. Again, it's not worship in the same way we think of worship as monotheists, probably, most of us, but it's much more like a showing of regard and respect, to continue respect, to show honor for, and that may involve simply recognizing their presence as kami, spirits, minor deities, if you will. And it also involves frequently placing offerings of food or drink. You will see Shinto shrines where there will be oranges or sometimes bottles of sake. Apparently, the deities really like sake. They also like cash. That's another thing that you'll find out, because usually as an offering, if you don't bring food or something that sort, you can make a cash offering as a way of simply showing respect and regard for the kami. One of our guides said, yeah, the deities really like cash, so I'm quoting there. The practice of Shinto, and I apologize, by the way, for so many words, but I think to get an explanation of some of these things, I need to give you definitions that you can read as well as listen to me talk about. So Shinto and Asian Buddhism are completely interwoven. In Shinbutsu Shugo is the term, in a syncretized kind of religion. Much of this is based upon the idea that there is a universal kind of interconnecting energy that all the kami are part of. It's called musubi. And musubi is, again, this is part of the influence I think that Taoism has had, because musubi sounds very much like the Tao, the force that is running through all things, and that is represented in the kami. And again, you can tell the presence of a kami by this sense of awe. A shrine that is remember, Shinto shrine, Buddhist temple, Shinto shrines. A Shinto shrine is considered the place where a kami, particularly a powerful kami, will reside. It is the house that has been prepared for them. It is the place that you go where you can experience much more intimately a sense of the presence of that kami. And you should recognize this symbol up here, right? You saw it, you've seen it around already, particularly if you went out to Miyajima Island, you saw the beautiful red torii. It's called the Torii gate. The Torii is the gate that separates the secular world on the outside from the sacred land or the sacred area past the gate where the kami are believed to reside. And so part of the Shinto faith will be to go to shrines and to, because there it's easier to come in contact with, to show your regard, the fact that you made an effort to go to the shrine, you're showing respect, you're showing regard for the kami. You will also notice that people who practice Shinto, when they walk through a torii gate, they will not walk through the middle. They will not walk down the middle. That's considered the kami have the priority to be able to walk through the middle. They will walk on one side or the other, you know, closer to the upright pillars that make up the torii gate. There are about 81,000 shrines that is Shinto shrines in Japan. There are about 85,000 Shinto priests. When you visit a Shinto shrine, you will often see priests, and they will be wearing purple or sometimes blue, but then there also will be women that are sort of running the gift counter. You know, you can buy charms, you can buy good wishes, which they don't usually say they're prayers. They are, you know, someone expresses their desire for something, and they present themselves and they ask for the kami to help with this. They'll usually talk about wishes rather than prayers when they talk about the requests that they have made to the kami. This image, by the way, and I always forget to mention it here when I've got the slide up, these are two of the original, the great creator kamis. This is Azanagi is the male, and Azanami is the female. And I'll talk about them again in just a minute. But you'll notice that Azanagi has a long spear. It's a jeweled spear, and the creation story in Shinto is that Azanagi and Azanami dipped their jeweled spear into the ocean. When they pulled it out, the water droplets off of their spear created the islands of Japan. And that is their creation story. In fact, a theologian I read not too long ago, a Shinto theologian, said that the very fact that that sounds so unlikely is why they're convinced it's true. At least the Shinto theologian at that time. The Shinto is very much oriented it's very action-oriented more than faith-oriented. You may not be familiar with the words, but the word orthodoxy, which is based in Greek, means right belief. Christianity, for instance, is primarily a religion about orthodoxy. It's believing the right things. Some religions are more about orthopraxy. That is what you do, the action associated with it. Shinto is much more concerned with orthopraxy, to the rituals of purification. And you probably have noticed, if you've been to any of the Shinto shrines, before you go through the torii gate, there will be a basin, a stone basin of some kind, and there will be bamboo ladles. You are, as an act of purification and showing of respect before you enter into the sacred area of the Shinto shrine, you take the ladle and you rinse your left hand, and then you rinse your right hand, and then you're supposed to rinse out your mouth. All of that is simply, again, a showing of respect, a cleansing kind of ritual before you go in. In terms of theology for Shintoism, again, the most fundamental understanding is that the kami are gods or spirits or spiritual essences. Now, there are many of these. In fact, you know, which is why we can't think of them as God the way most of us monotheists, the people from the West, would think. They have an expression, yaoyoruzu no kami, which means literally 8 million kami. Doesn't mean 8 million, although they talk about 8 million gods sometimes. It means a lot. All right, it's a way of saying there's a lot, like, oh man, you know, billions and billions of years ago. It just simply means a lot. So there are a lot of kami that exist in the world, all of them manifestations of the musubi, that is the interconnecting energy that is in the universe. The kanagara I mentioned is the way of the kami, refers to the natural order of things, the natural flow of things, and the more one is in tune with the kanagara, the more one will express that in their life by being ethical, by being more pure, by being more sincere and honest. So the kanagara is the sort of discipline of relationship with the kami that brings one into the right order of things. Let's all say it together. I can't even say that with a straight face. It's Amino Manaka Nushi. Amino Manaka Nushi is the first of the great kami. After Amino Manaka Nushi, we have Azanagi and Azanami, which I've already mentioned, but I'll put them up here. They are the two creator deities. Azanagi means he who invites. Azanami means she who is invited. And in fact, there's a great part of the creation story when they are created and they walk round the Great World Pillar and they see one another. Before Izanagi can say anything, Izanami shares a poem. It's the first poem in Japanese poetry, and said, "To see a man so fair is far beyond compare." And Izanagi said, "You ruined it. I'm the one who's supposed to invite. I should have spoken first." So they had to back up, go back to where they started, and then come back around the world pillar again. And Izanagi then speaks first, the one who invites, and he says, "It is so beyond compare to meet a woman so fair," which not very original, Izanagi, but that was their meeting. And at that point, everything got to be okay because Izanagi was the one who spoke first or invited, and Izanami responded to him. So these are fundamental principles about Shinto. There are a number of different kinds of Shinto. It gets a little complicated, not as complicated as Buddhism, but still. The vast majority of Shinto shrines are general public shrines. They are maintained by an association of Shinto shrines, which is supported by the government. They are responsible for taking care of them. And obviously the people who make donations as they come there to pray, they assist with that. And I think that some of the guides have told you already that when one comes in to make a prayer, there's usually a bell or a gong. One will shake the rope and ring the gong or bell. You will bow once, clap twice, and during this time you're offering your prayer, and then you bow twice, and then you leave after having made an offering at the beginning. Now, for me, for those of you who want to experience that, that's fine. For me, that's for someone who's Shinto, and I'm not, that's an act of recognizing Kami. In effect, it's an act of worship. And so I'm slow to do that sort of thing because I don't want it to appear that I'm doing it as a tourist rather than somebody who takes it seriously. But it's up to you how you want to proceed with that. But the vast majority of the 80,000 or so of the shrines in Japan are all part of the public shrines of Shinto shrine worship. The imperial household of Japan has their own, they have 3 shrines on the imperial grounds that only they can worship at. And so there are 3 shrines on for the imperial household. There's also a folk Shinto. It is sort of like fundamentalist religion where I came from in Tennessee. A lot of folk traditions. The theology involves different kinds of beliefs, which some other Shinto believe are just superstitions, involving deities and spirits. There's a lot of emphasis on spirit possession, on divination, on shamanic healing, but it does exist as one type of Shinto. There also is what's called sect Shinto. Sect Shinto are private Shinto gatherings, not the public ones that we mentioned at the top. The sect Shinto are various communities. There are 5 different kinds of sect Shinto, which gives you some idea of the complexity. There is pure Shinto, Confucian sects, mountain worship sects, purification sects, and faith healing sects. All of them are part of this category of sect Shinto. And then finally, some people have gotten tired of the syncretism, the involvement of Buddhism in their faith, and they pursue what's called Ko-Shinto. Anytime you see Ko, K-O, that means old. That's the old way. So Ko-Shinto are people who desire to go back to the old way of Shinto, pre-Buddhism, before Buddhism came in and they got kind of mingled together. So this is a very quick introduction to Shinto. Whenever I spend that much time talking about a major world religion, I inherently do it injustice. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them in a minute, but I want to talk about a few other things first. And that is, there are what's called the 3 teachings in Asia. The 3 teachings are Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. And you'll remember I told you that during the Axial Age, all 3 of those began very close to the same time. In fact, this image on the left is a painting called the Vinegar Tasters, and it represents Buddha, Lao Tzu, or Lao Tzu sometimes pronounced, who was the founder of Taoism, and Konghuzi, or Confucius as we know him. Since they all lived at the same time, they're gathered around this vat of vinegar tasting it. Now, I don't know why you would gather around a vat of vinegar to taste it, unless you have some mustard greens to put it on or something, but that's what they're doing. And then this image on the right side is called Confucius Presents a Young Buddha to Lao Tzu. Both of these represent, now we don't have no indication that they met each other. They didn't get together and compare notes. but they all lived at the same time in different places. Lao Tzu and Confucius were both in China. There is some suggestion they may have met at one point, but we don't know. But Buddha, of course, was over in, and I'll talk about Buddha, the Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, was over in India. Actually, he was born in southern part of what's now Nepal. But these three teachings are really foundational, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, to all the beliefs in East Asia, China, North Korea, and in Japan. In fact, their influence goes further than that, down into the Southeast Asia as well. Talk about Taoism for a few minutes. Taoism, and for a while I had a symbol up here. This is the character for it, but the yin and yang symbol. That's Taoism. Okay, the yin and yang, the two interwoven sort of comma-looking things. Taoism, which was founded by Lao Tzu or Lao Tzu, either way, and by the way, you may wonder why it used to be Mao Zedong and now it's Mao Zedong. You know, why it used to be Beiping and now it's Beijing, you know, various words have changed. Before the 1950s, the system for transliterating Chinese into English was called the Wade-Giles system, you know, to English scholars. And transliterating simply means you take the characters that we can't read and you put them in characters we can recognize and that we can sound out. But in the 1950s, that's why a lot of words that we see that are representing Chinese have so many commas and hyphens in them. That was the old system. Starting in the 1950s, they began a new system called the Pinyin system, Pinyin system, which is much more straightforward, and if you read it the way it looks, you'll be much closer to the original pronunciation than the old system. And so that's why you often will see two different representations. Lao Tzu was the original name under the Wade-Giles system. Lao Tzu is the more common word today. You'll notice there's no hyphen in there. Anyway, just to give you that background, because people have asked me before, why have they changed the names of everything? And sometimes they have changed them, but sometimes it's just pronounced differently. Taoism is more a way of life than it is a religion. There is no inherent, and same thing is true for Confucianism, there is no inherent belief in a deity. They are almost atheistic. Now, both Taoism and Confucianism do believe that there are spirits, sort of minor deities in the world, but Confucius, for instance, said, yes, they're there, and you may need to pay proper respect for them, but stay away from them as much as you can. So it's not like that's the emphasis in these two faiths. Taoism is much more about the idea of there being a consistency, a unity in the universe, past, present, and future, of there being the physical world and spiritual world are interwoven, and so because of that, there's a sense of relativism, of spontaneity, of emptiness, that it's not your efforts. Things are going to work out how they're going to work out, whether you try to force them or not. And Taoism particularly is oriented around the concept of the Tao. I mentioned Musubi as the sort of interconnecting energy in Shinto. Well, Taoism affected that a little bit in terms of the understanding of Musubi, because in Taoism you have the Tao. It's T-A-O. Sometimes today they will spell it D-A-O because of the change in spelling. But it's pronounced Tao either way. The force of Tao is the energy that goes through all things, and it's what keeps things moving forward. Whenever somebody will say, well, you know, I was in the groove, I was in the zone, or, go with the flow. The idea is that one has gotten into that flow of the Tao. The best way to understand it, probably, in modern contemporary use, is from Star Wars. The whole thing about the Force be with you. Give yourself over to the Force. Allow the Force to work through you. That's a modern version of the Tao, and one of the better definitions and the better way for us to understand it, I think. But Lao Tzu was the one who taught this as a philosophy much more, and then there's a lot more to it in terms of how you then live that out in your life. But Taoism has influenced not only Shinto, but many other kinds of religions and thoughts, and even politics in East Asia as well. We then have Confucianism, Confucius, or as his original name was, Kung Fu Tzu, and the symbol up here is the character Ru. It means scholar, and sometimes Confucianism is called Ruism. scholarly pursuit. Confucius' big concern, again, he was not concerned about deities. He wasn't focused on worshiping God or anything. He was trying to come up with a philosophical system that will allow people to get along and for society to work better. He actually traveled around fairly early in his life trying to get some local ruler or king or warlord to hire him to institute the various beliefs that he had about how society ought to be put together. Much of what he maintained is a pretty complicated system of duties and etiquette in relationships. He especially emphasized the critical nature of loyalty. Loyalty to family, but also loyalty to your lord, the person that was above you in the social structure. This greatly influenced, and we'll talk about that, it greatly influenced Japan in the sense of it was a major theme in the Code of Bushido, the samurai code, that you have an obligation to the person, your lord, the person who is above you in the social structure. So social responsibility for Confucius, it meant recognizing where you are in society, taking seriously the responsibilities associated with that position, and then doing your very best to fulfill those responsibilities in a good way. One of the problems that they ran into is Neo-Confucianism, which came along later from Korea to Japan, was so committed to that it actually stifled some growth. There wasn't a whole lot of room for a person to have ambition to be bigger or better or more, or to move up the ranks of society, if the whole focus of the system involved recognizing your place and what you should do to be responsible in your place. And so it did create some problems. But a lot of this issue of loyalty, of duty, of responsibility influenced the Japanese religions, including, as I say, the samurai, Code of Bushido, as well as Shinto. I'm stepping back now to talk about Buddhism. The Dharmic religions, or the religions of India, and again, Dharma means the teaching religions, began early Middle Vedic period, which was a period of the Indus Valley and which is the area that's now both India and Pakistan. Hinduism came along somewhere around 2500 BC. The roots of it go back to 4000 BC, we believe. But off of this Hinduism, we get Buddhism and Jainism. Both of them came out in the environment of Hinduism. Buddha, the original Buddhism, was a non-theistic religion. The Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, the original Buddha, did not say anything about God. His concern was the human condition and the suffering that everyone experiences and how to get rid of that. Buddhism, when it came to East Asia, completely changed. And I'll give you a little bit of further indication of that. But once it moved to the East, I've always, as I've studied this more and more all the time, and this is sort of where I got into all the history and culture stuff, is through the world religions. It's almost wrong to call them both Buddhism, but they do. But there are different styles of Buddhism. The original Buddhism, which came out of India, was called Theravada Buddhism. It literally means the school of the elders, the old way of doing things. Later on, when these various other kinds of Buddhism were developed that are very different, they became known as a group as Mahayana Buddhism, which means the great vehicle. It's great vehicle because there's a lot of different kinds of Buddhism riding along on it. Including all of the ones that we see, with one exception, of the ones that we see in Japan. And then from Hinduism, and I don't mean to suggest that Islam evolved from any of these, it was a very different source, but Hinduism and Islam together sort of formed Sikhism in the 15th century AD. That's a gross generalization, but it's a simplified way of understanding. There are aspects of what are clearly Hinduism and aspects of what I believe were brought out of Islam that make up the Sikh religion, which is in India as well. Buddhism. Let's talk about Buddhism for a minute. The founder of Buddhism, who lived, we believe, in the 560 to 490, was Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. Now, there have been many beings, many people, identified as Buddhists since then. There's not just one Buddha, but he was the first one. He was born in an area of what's now southern Nepal, was India at that time. And to talk about the difference in these, and I've already mentioned them, Theravada, which is the old form, the school of the elders, and Mahayana, which includes Pure Land, Zen, Nichiren, Tibetan or Vajrayana, and other kinds, including the Shingon. Somebody was asking me to explain to them the difference between Shingon and Pure Land Buddhism. I'll do that in 5 minutes. And in Thailand, China, Burma, Japan, East Asia, really globally. But the reason why Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism are fundamentally different is because of the environment that they grew up in. Buddhism that was originally articulated by Siddhartha Gautama in India was coming out of a Hindu environment where the theological issues were very much what we call reincarnation. They would call it samsara, the idea that for all human beings, you are born, you live a life that is full of suffering, you die, and then you are born again. And you live another life full of suffering, and then you die, and then you're born again. This is the cycle of rebirth, samsara. This is part of the Hindu faith as well, and it was much of what Buddha was trying to address, the original Buddha. And it is based upon your rebirth, the quality of your rebirth, what you come back as, your state in life when you are reborn, is based upon how you conducted yourself in previous lives. That's called karma. If you were good, you did well with what you had, then you will come back in a better state than the last one when you were reborn. If you did bad things, you will come back in a worse state. According to the original Theravada Buddhism that was articulated, the original kind, there was no salvation from that. There was no way to mitigate that other than to try to live a better life. And so there wasn't somebody who was going to pluck you up and save you or send you to paradise. When Mahayana Buddhism moved over into China, primarily China, Korea, and Japan, they did not have a history of believing in the transmigration of the soul, samsara, reincarnation. That was not an issue for them. And so Buddhism had to fundamentally change where it was going. To the original Buddha, the ultimate goal was nirvana. Nirvana is not heaven. Nirvana literally means to be extinguished. It means not to have to come back, so that you don't have to suffer anymore. When Buddhism got into East Asia, they were going, what's up with that? The best you can do is not come back? They wanted something more than that because they did not have this theory of suffering, samsara, in life after life. And so the Mahayana Buddhism, there's various kinds of it, all of them involve some kind of salvation, some kind of afterlife in which there is a benefit that is not at all like the original Buddhism, okay? The story of the Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, he was born a prince in the south of what is now Nepal, was India then, and while he was just a child, a soothsayer came along and told his father, who was the local king, your son will either be a great religious leader or he will be a great ruler. Well, his father, the king, wanted him to be a great ruler. And he said, well, how can I make that happen? He said, well, the difference will be what he experiences in the world. Well, his father pretty much locked him in the palace for most of his young life until he was a young adult, and he had everything he wanted. You know, he did not experience suffering. He did not see anyone who was sick or old. Well, as a young adult, he left the palace on his own. His father didn't realize it. He goes out, and the Siddhartha Gautama has what are called the four sights. He sees an old man, a sick man, a corpse, a dead person, and an ascetic, someone who was denying himself, starving himself in order to try to achieve some spiritual enlightenment. The realization of those various kinds of suffering caused the Siddhartha Gautama to say, I'm going to dedicate myself to finding out how you can deal with that suffering, how you can end it, or how you can prevent life from being so painful. And so he became a religious traveler. He learned meditation, deep forms of meditation, but then decided that the best meditation he could do wasn't getting it for him. He then attempted asceticism. And if you get down into Southeast Asia, you will sometimes see Buddhas where the Buddha looks like a skeleton, because those represent him during the period when he almost starved himself to death. And he came out of that and said, well, asceticism doesn't do it. So he said, indulging yourself doesn't get you where you want to go, and asceticism, denying yourself, doesn't get you where you want to go. There must be a middle way, and that middle way has become a symbol. Sometimes Buddhism is called the middle way. Well, Buddha finally sat down under what's called a Bodhi tree. It's quite literally a ficus religioso. Those trees still exist. He sat down under the Bodhi tree and said, I am not getting up until I achieve enlightenment, understanding. And after several days of being there, he did achieve enlightenment. He became the awakened one, which is really what Buddha means. It means the enlightened one or the awakened one, and he had an understanding which he then began to teach. He gathered disciples around himself, and there are two aspects of what he came up with in his meditation, his enlightenment. One is the cause of suffering, and the other is what to do about it. The cause of suffering is articulated in the Four Noble Truths, and there's an aspect of these two things I'm about to show you that do inform all kinds of Buddhism, but not with the reincarnation part. First, the Siddhartha Gautama identified the truth of dukkha. Dukkha means suffering, that all of life is suffering. And it's physical pain, emotional pain, grief, loss, and if you're not feeling it right now, just wait a day or two. Something will happen, okay? And as we get older, we recognize the end of our life is approaching, and all of that is pain. So dukkha means suffering, dissatisfaction, a lack of fulfillment. It means any of the frustrations that we feel in life. Secondly, he identified the truth of the origin of dukkha, that it came from craving and clinging to pleasurable things and trying to avoid painful things. Instead of, he wasn't proposing you get rid of all, aches and pains. What he was saying is, how do we deal with that in a way that allows us to accept that as part of what life is without it being so emotionally painful? How can we get rid of that part of the suffering? And so the idea is that we understand that our clinging or our evading of the things in life are what's actually painful to us. So the third principle is the truth of cessation of dukkha, how you get rid of it, is to put an end to the craving and clinging. And he said ignorance was at the root of most of this, lack of understanding. That will end suffering, and so rebirth, dissatisfaction, and re-death no longer will arise. And the more you're able to grow in this way, the less likely you are to be reborn in samsara. And by the way, I explained to one of my roommates a long time before I met Carolyn about Buddhism and about samsara, reincarnation, and he said, so let me get this straight. If I'm a Buddhist and I live a good life, then I'll come back as another person and I'll have to try it all over again. If I am a really good person, then I don't have to come back at all. But if I'm a really bad person, I come back as a beetle. And I said, that's pretty close to it. Yeah, that's kind of how to understand it. I mean, it sounds a little trivial, but that's sort of what samsara is all about. And then the fourth point of the Noble Truths is the truth of the path of liberation from suffering is by following the Noble Eightfold Path. And by the way, this symbol up here, the wheel, it looks like sort of the steering wheel of a ship. That eight-spoked wheel is a major symbol for Buddhism because it represents the Eightfold Path. Whoops. This is the Noble Eightfold Path, or what is called the middle way. The 8 things that one must do in order to get free from the suffering in the world. 1, you have to have the right view, meaning the right understanding that you accept the reality of suffering and how to get rid of it. 2nd, you have to have right intention, which means the right thoughts and aspirations. 3rd, you have to have right speech, no falsehood, no abuse, no chatter, the way you speak affects you. 4th, right action, that you're moral and you cause no harm. 5th, right livelihood, how you make your living, that you cannot work with weapons, degradation, meat, intoxicants, or poisons. 6th is right effort, that you have discipline of thought, word, and deed. 7 is right mindfulness, that you're alert to everything that affects you. And my wife will tell you how many tens of thousands of times I have said as a pastor, the greatest failing of humanity is not paying attention. Okay? That's point 7. Number 8, right concentration, that you meditate on the right things. If you grow in these ways, then you can achieve a level of enlightenment. It is possible, as I say, there have been many Buddhas. It's possible for one to become a Buddha. There are different Buddhist traditions have different approaches to that. But you also may become a bodhisattva. You ever heard that expression? Do we have any Steely Dan fans in the audience? Okay, you know bodhisattva? Yeah, 1973, Steely Dan, great band, they had a song called Bodhisattva, and the words are, Bodhisattva, would you take me by the hand? Bodhisattva, would you take me by the hand? Can you show me the shine of your Japan, the sparkle of your China? Can you show me Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva? A Bodhisattva is a being, a person, that has gotten right up to the edge of full enlightenment, of becoming a Buddha, but they have chosen not to step over that line in order to try to help people that are not enlightened yet at all. So Bodhisattva is like a helper that could be a Buddha if they wanted, but have chosen not to yet. So Bodhisattva is an important concept in the Buddhist faith, and you see that a lot in the East, particularly in East Asia. So let's talk about Buddhism in Japan specifically. I'm running a little long, I apologize for that. As of 2014, there were 377,000 Buddhist monks, priests, and leaders in Japan. Buddhism came to Japan, as I think I said earlier, around 552 from Korea. Today, 60% of Japanese have a Butsudan, a Buddhist shrine in their home. And in the 12th century, during the time of the shoguns, the Kamakura shoguns adopted Buddhism in a big way. And it really was the focus of much of the belief system of the samurai and of the shoguns. Then in the 19th century, during the Meiji Restoration, which I'll give you a lot more detail about later, the Buddhism had been so associated with the shoguns that the emperor tried to get rid of it. First he tried to sort of push it to the side and then tried to actually destroy it. But today there is still a great deal of popularity for Buddhism. The most popular form of Buddhism in Japan is Pure Land Buddhism, or Amidism it's called sometimes. This creature in the middle, the being in the middle, is the Amida Buddha. And the two flanking him are his Bodhisattva assistants. The Amida Buddha, Amida Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism, sometimes called Western Paradise Buddhism, is the most faith-oriented of all kinds of Buddhism. The idea is that the Amida Buddha will take you out of this life and take you to paradise if you have faith in the Amida Buddha and if you recite a mantra, Namu Amida Butsu. Some say that you only have to say it once in faith. Some people say the more you say it in your life, the better off you are, so there's differences there as well. But the idea is that in this life is always going to be corrupt. We are never going to have an ideal place here. And so because we desire that, there is a paradise for us. And that Amida Buddha can take you there if you have faith in the Amida Buddha and chant his name in faith. There's also focus on a number of sutras, which are texts, poems, things that are supposed to lift us spiritually. So Pure Land Buddhism is the most popular in Japan. And when we get into talking about art and architecture and gardens, I'll mention how that gets reflected even in some of their garden design. The second type of Buddhism I'll mention is Nichiren Buddhism. This statue is of the priest Nichiren, who lived in the 13th century. He introduced a new kind of Buddhism. There's two versions of this. Some of them think that he was a bodhisattva, a near enlightened being, and some don't. But the main primary parts of Nichiren Buddhism is that you undertake it in faith, that this is the right approach. You chant, especially the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the most common of the sutras in Buddhism, and then you study the writings of Nichiren. He left a lot of writings behind. A big focus here is Nichiren taught that everyone has the potential to become a Buddha now. You don't have to go, reincarnated or do anything else. You can become a Buddha now. There's a strong emphasis on social responsibility and also on political responsibility. In fact, today there are 37 different schools of Nichiren, and they vary in terms of the level of involvement they believe you should have in politics. And it's gotten Nichiren Buddhism in trouble sometimes. The government sometimes has not been happy with the political involvement of the Nichiren Buddhism. A third kind is Shingon. Now, who was it that asked me the difference in Shingon and Pure Land? Surely you must be here. Okay. Shingon literally means, Shingon literally means the pure words, and or true words. Shingon Buddhism is the most esoteric sort of the most mysterious of all the Buddhisms in Japan. It is very close. It's a Vajrayana version of Buddhism, so it's very similar to Tibetan Buddhism, although it is part of the East Asian sense. The biggest difference is that Shingon Buddhism and another kind of Buddhism called Tendai Buddhism, if any of you end up visiting the 1001 Buddha's temple, that's a Tendai Buddhism, but you will notice in front of them, they literally have 1001 Buddhas there. And in front of them, they have creatures that look like this. Because Shingon and Tendai absorbed a lot of their beliefs from Hinduism. They have some of the gods from Hinduism and some of the demons from Hinduism have been brought over as part of their beliefs. In fact, the Shingon Buddhism even identifies the Indian god Indra as being the king of heaven. So there's a lot more Hindu influence here, whereas there's not in Pure Land. And this does not have the same level of faith orientation as does Pure Land Buddhism. But in fact, a couple places that you'll go, if you go to the tallest waterfall in the world in one of our stops, there are several places you'll go that you will see the goddess of mercy. Kanon is the goddess of mercy. And sometimes those are Shingon, and sometimes those are Tendai, because they both have taken gods and goddesses from the Hindu beliefs. And finally, the Zen Buddhism. Zen was originally from China. It was called Chan Buddhism. In Korea, it's Xian Buddhism. Came to Japan as Zen Buddhism. The main principle of Zen Buddhism is that by meditation, by your own effort, you can achieve enlightenment. You don't require teachings, or it's your effort can do it. And there's three major schools of Zen Buddhism. The most common one is called Soto. And Soto literally means just sitting around. The idea, like the Siddhartha Gautama, is that you sit and meditate. And ideally, that will bring you to a state of enlightenment. You will become an enlightened being. The second school, which a lot of people have heard of in terms of what they do, is the Rinzai. Rinzai, they focus on these mental puzzles, word puzzles, which are called koans. Koans are intended to cause you to realize the limitation of your rationality so that you can break through that to a more spiritual understanding of things. You've all heard the koan, what is the sound of one hand clapping, right? The idea is that if you are a student monk in Rinzai Buddhism, you will be given challenges like that, these mental challenges, and you're supposed to meditate on it and consider it and then come back to your master and give your understanding, and the master will tell you whether you're on the right track or whether you completely missed it or not. One of the most famous of those is a Zen master once said, if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. Now, I used that in one of the previous talks. Several days later, one of the passengers came up to me, one of the guests came up to me and said, I've been thinking about that for days. And let me tell you what I think. And I go, well, I'm not a Zen master, but that's fine. He said they've been talking about it every night at dinner. If you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. So now you have something to work on while you're on board the ship. The third major kind of Zen Buddhism is Abaku Buddhism, which primarily will use meditation in calligraphy or painting or other kinds of creative expression. That's part of their Zen. And by the way, Zen or Chan or Seon all come from the Sanskrit word for meditation. That is a really quick introduction, and I've already run long, but I can take a couple of questions maybe, and then we have to turn it over to Laura for her music. Questions? Did I answer your question about the difference in Shingon and Pure Land?
Yeah, just one additional.
Okay.
When I saw the Shingon, I saw these really elaborate paintings.
Right.
And I wondered how that fit into it.
Well, they will represent they're very expressive. You get paintings like this, which is, it's a demon deity that there's always fire around. And so this was brought from China by Kukai, a famous monk. But you do get a lot of paintings, a lot of expressions, because they have more deities to work with, and they often will incorporate them in that. Yes?
you know, here with, I'm certain you find it as a pastor, religion is not necessarily part of young people's life today and their culture and
Right.
whatever. Is that true here as well? I mean, are the children taught religion in school? Are they, do they conform as much as their grandmother does to?
Yeah, I don't think there is as much religious expression. You will find more and more, like I say, the majority of, if asked to check a box, the majority of Japanese will say, I don't belong to any organized religion.
Okay.
It is much more a cultural thing, and so it's not as much like they're involved in a religion as it is they're involved in their culture. Okay, so it's not quite the same, but you don't get a lot of the young people actively involved as much. Yes?
Well, we did see an awful lot of prayers/wishes about success in school.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the major things that they will pray about is success in school or admission to the good schools.
Right, that's it.
And so you will get a lot of that kind of thing. And so they do practice it, but if you ask them, you know, what do you have faith in, the answer could be anywhere. Okay, one more.
Are young people invited like in camps where they're all, you know, Shinto type people? Or whatever, that mixture of Shinto and Buddhism?
Yes, Shinbutsu Shugo.
Or are they, or what camps do they do when they are 14, 15?
What camps do they do?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of Shinto camps, but I don't know. I mean, I confess that I don't know about that. I think much of the influence, much of their training in Shinto comes from their families. Remember, 80% of Japanese, it's believed, have Shinto kamidanas, shrines in their homes. And you've seen Shinto shrines are everywhere. If you go to Kyoto, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a Shinto shrine, okay? And so you get a lot of that kind of exposure just as part of the culture. I have to stop. I'm sorry, but we're pushing into Laura's time, and I want to give her a chance. Stick around for Laura's music. I encourage you to that. And if there are any other questions you have for me, I can talk to you outside, or you can grab me as we go along. Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock.